Welcome to the Hope After Child Loss podcast, where we endeavor to offer stories of hope to grieving parents and siblings so that they might rediscover life filled with meaning, purpose, and hope. We invite you to come and join us. Well, hello, guys. Welcome to another episode of Hope After Child Loss. I'm your host, Greg Buffkin, and we're really glad you joined us today. And I'm looking forward to a conversation today with my friend Charmaine Castillo. She is going to be sharing the story of her grief journey over the past, five years?
6 years now.
6 years. 6 years. So, Charmaine, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be here, kind of sharing my story. That's the good news of it. I'm here and I'm able to share it with such a joy in my heart, and that's kind of overflowing right now. So this is a good time to share that story.
Yeah. What you mean when you said kinda?
Well, this is the real deal. The joy of the Lord is my strength. And it's really, usually when people talk about grief, that their face automatically turns down into a frown or sad eyes when you share your story. But me being able to share my story and smile, that's different. And I'm enjoying that part of this journey. It took a while to get here, but now that I'm here, I'm happy about it.
Yeah, I wish people could see that smile and that joy. It's written all over you.
It's there. it's in the room.
It is. It absolutely is. I can feel it. Well, listen, why don't you take a couple of minutes, Charmaine, and just tell our listeners a little bit about you personally, and then if you would like, before we talk about Curtis, you can share anything you'd like also about your story. About your family, because there are some things that people, I think, will be surprised to find out about you that you have jumped into in this season of your life, because you've got a whole new life that you have entered into over these past, 3-4 years, something like that. You're an author now. You've written some books.
It started 6 years ago when Curtis died. It's like I became alive, and all the things that were laying dormant in my life, in my soul, and it just sprung up. It sprung up from his grave. So, and it's all God really, and my engagement with him, and how I walk and talk with him, and how I walked and talked with him even before this happened. Because, talking about my life, and my family, and I come from a family, a legacy. My father was a musician. My mother was a musician. They were both backups for Sister Rosetta Tharpe, who is now in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And My father was her music director for a short season before she, really got out there in the rock and roll when they were doing the gospel. And my mother was her backup singer. And that's how my parents met. So my mother was a part of the Rosettes, and my father was her music director, and they traveled around together. And then they came off the road to start having a family. And that would be us, me and my siblings. So that was my beginning. And also my father's father, who I never met. I never met my grandmother and grandfather on my father's side, because they died before my father even got married. So, but my grandfather was a Baptist minister, and he was in great standing in that community. So, my roots are deep in the faith, in the church.
Yeah.
So that's how I grew up as that little girl, in my little neighborhood. I grew up as that little girl who gave her life to Christ when I was about 8 years old. And that was an experience in itself, because I can remember so plainly how that happened. and I didn't look to my mother to get her permission to get up and go to the front of the church, something in me just stood up and was like, yeah, I want to give my heart to Jesus. And I just, the tears were streaming and the people were looking at me, which is something that I was always afraid of, people looking at me. I was very fearful as
Yeah.
a child. But, the after my grief journey, all of that fear seems to be dissipating, even though it was with me all my life.
Yeah. But isn't it so gracious of God that He's the one who initiates that relationship? He even gives us the faith to turn to Him and invite Jesus into our lives.
Yeah, I love that about him. It's like it didn't have anything to do with me, but it was his plan from the beginning. And he
Right.
chose the time when my heart will be open to receive him. And for some people, it's sooner rather than later, but that opportunity is always there to just invite him in. And I'm so glad that I did it at such a young age because I had so much to learn about him. And even now in my senior years, I have so much to learn about him, but I feel like I'm that little newborn Christian all over again who's like, "Oh God, you really are great. Now that I have the knowledge of how great you are, let's do this thing all over again." And that's the journey he's taken me on this side of what I call before Curtis died, my BC, and after Curtis died, my AC. So my AC, oh, it is turning out to be something I can't say I never imagined it. I imagined it in my dreams, but I didn't think in my dreams it could really be because I knew how I was, as timid and shy. I would watch other people do it and just wish I could be that way in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's amazing how God does that, that even through something so tragic and traumatic, that God can even use that for our
Yes.
good and for his honor and glory. And you've seen that. You are living that. And I've experienced that too. And I've heard so many stories from other parents who have lost a child and how God brings good out of such tragedy and something only
Right.
God can do, right?
And that was one of my questions right after it all happened and after I found out about it. It's like I had this knowing, God, yes, I know that you're good. You're good because I learned in Bible school, we had this one teacher who would say, God is good, the devil is bad, and they never trade places. She would say that before every single class, and that was
Hmm.
ingrained in me years and years ago. So when this happened, I just knew, God, you're good. The devil is bad because I wanted to throw the accusation in the right place. I don't want to be mad at God because I knew who the enemy was. I was like, how low down can you get to take my son? I know it's you. I know it's you. You are the one who's come to steal, kill, and destroy. So it's
That's right.
you. And I really saw him as my enemy at that point. And I believe the warrior on the inside of me rose up because I saw my enemy face to face. He took my son, and that was a very low blow. And it took
Hmm.
me to the lowest place. But even in that low place, I'm glad in that low place that Christ was my foundation because you're not going to go but so low. You're not going to sink but so low if God is your foundation. So while I'm flat on my back, unable to breathe, it's like God breathed life into me at that
Yeah.
moment. And it was
Yeah.
his life that brought me back around because I was all over
Yeah.
the place in my mind, that
Yeah.
that moment. And I can actually go back to that moment, but it doesn't have the same impact on me that it did in that moment. But I needed
Right.
to experience that so that when I share my testimony about, I know how it feels, when you feel like the life is gone out of you and you don't even want to get up, you don't want to breathe, you just want to die. You
Right.
don't want to think about how you're going to live. You don't want no parts of this life because it's over for you in your mind. But God
Yeah.
says no. I still have work for you to do, and I'm still here to bring you through this hard thing because I'm God and I can do anything. Nothing's impossible. Allow me to be a comforter to you. And he kind of stepped in, with his comfortness in the very beginning, with his presence of peace. So whew,
Exactly.
it was a journey.
Yeah.
Just talking about it, it's like, wow, that
Yeah.
was a journey that I went through.
Yeah. Yeah. Because his presence brings peace and joy and hope.
That's what it brought in that moment, because to tell you the truth, that was my first encounter after the realization hit me that my son really is dead. As I was going into the conference room to get myself together, I was at work, and I wanted a private place to process what I had just undertaken in my mind and saw with my eyes as I'm looking at Facebook, seeing all of this on his Facebook page, all this rest in power. Curtis was a good guy, and I had to reconcile in my mind, is this really happening? And so I made a phone call. I called his phone number. Someone else answered and gave me some story about what may have happened and gave me the number for the New York Police Department detective that I should talk to. So on my way down the hallway to have this private moment, that's when I had an encounter with God's peace after I
Yeah.
had a meltdown. But his
So
peace just warmed in around me.
let's take a step back for our listeners. I know a little bit about this story because you and I have
Oh,
talked, one off before. So
yeah.
what I'd like for you to do is to tell us a little bit about Curtis, your son, and then jump back into the story and bring our listeners up to speed with what actually precipitated what you were just talking about a minute ago, seeing this information on Facebook. Can you do
Yeah.
that?
Well, what had happened was it, it was the day of the solar eclipse. And Curtis, he was 32 years old. Curtis was he was just my Curtis child. Curtis was Curtis. And he
Yeah.
was so different, but he was himself. I guess he was a blend of his dad, his free spirited dad, and me, the smart, reasonable one, polite. I had to train him to be that way. But Curtis was incredibly smart when he was growing up in school. He was a typical mischievous kid, but he was very adventurous. And he learned very quickly. He was very athletic in the things that he loved. In fact, during the summer times, I was a single parent during that time. During the summer, I let him go to day camp. And one day he told me that he needed to be there at a certain time because he was on the swim team. And I'm like, Curtis, you can't swim. And he's like, yeah, I've been going to day camp. I learned how to swim. I'm on the swim team. And I'm thinking, there's no way you're on the swim team. Curtis was on the swim team, just right under my nose. He's on the swim team. And so he picked up skateboarding the same way. He just had a knack for it, a love for it. And that's all he wanted to do. So when we were in Richmond, he skated on the streets. And when we were on our way to Tampa, Florida, I relocated to Tampa, Florida about 20 some years ago. Curtis was about 14 at the time. And all he wanted to do is spend time at the skate park. So he was my skateboarder, and there's a whole culture with the skateboarders, and for him, it was family. Everybody that he met was family. If he knew you for 1 second, you're family. And that's the kind of personality that he was. Everybody was his friend. When
Mm.
we moved to Tampa, I mean, he's 14. I have some 18-year-old bearded kid knocking on my door looking for Curtis because he's his bud. And I'm like, what are you guys doing? They're playing video games. Okay. And then the next week, here comes this little 8-year-old kid. I'm looking for, he didn't even know his name, but Curtis is standing behind me. He points to him. And Curtis says, oh, that's my friend. And He goes off to play with this 8-year-old. He's just everybody's friend. He was that kind of personality and very magnetic. So he took that personality with him when he left Tampa to go to New York when he was 22. I think George Bush, I don't know what president was in there that gave stimulus checks, but he got his stimulus check and he bought a one-way ticket to New York, one-way ticket to New
Mm.
York. He was going to live his dream of being in New York. And so that was Curtis. He was my free-spirited son who just wanted to live his life, and everywhere he went, there are stories upon stories about his generosity, about his positive influence when they're down. He was just this all-around good guy who was wow and just loved life. He just
Yeah.
loved life.
Doesn't that give you so much joy as a parent and make you proud to hear stuff like that?
I was so proud because when he left at 22 and he died at 32, there's that 10-year gap where I didn't see him at all. I saw
Oh,
him once when I went to New York that April before he died. And other than that, it was just our conversations on the telephone. He made sure that he called me on Mother's Day, on Christmas, on my birthday, with the most obnoxious greeting that I will always hear in my head. Just, gave me mixed feelings. I'm glad you're calling, but why are you being so obnoxious? It's just that love, hate thing. But he was living the life that he wanted to live. And what more
yeah,
can you want for your children, for them to just be happy in life, no matter what it looks like to you?
sure.
I'm thinking he could have made better choices. You can come back to Florida and get reestablished, doing things the way I think you should be doing it. But he was doing it his way, and he was
Right.
happy. He was happy, and he was influencing the world. And when
Yeah.
I went there to remind him who he was, I'm like, Curtis, when you were born, I called you, a prophet to the nations, and he's like, that's what I'm doing. And, after he died, I found out his influence all over the world because of New York, so many kinds of influences are there in New York, so many cultures, it's just this melting pot of love and culture. And he was touching every part of that. So he's got friends in Switzerland, friends in Sweden, Africa, whoever comes to New York and encounters the Curtis effect,
Yeah.
he had influence over those people, and
Yeah.
the stories of love that came back to me just really just made my heart
Yeah.
swell to know he was that impactful in the lives of others in a good way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we know that there's another story on the other side of the story that you just described of the love and the um, all of the relationships that he established. Tell us what happened in New York, Charmaine.
Well, that a part of that story will always be a mystery to me because I was not there. But in all of Curtis's travelings, there was a head too heavy. It was like not a club, it was a museum, or not even a museum. It was a gathering place
Mm-hmm.
of people, of certain cultures or whatever they're doing there. So on this particular night, there were graffiti artists there. Curtis was a
Mm-hmm.
skateboarder amongst graffiti artists doing their thing at this, place where they just stop in to have, the nightlife in New York. They open up, a spot and you come in and like a gallery. It was like a gallery type thing.
Yeah.
So you come into the gallery and you mingle and you do whatever you do in the gallery. Well, something happened at that gallery that ended up with Curtis being, I'm going to call it cold cocked, and his head hitting the sidewalk. And
Mm.
because of his head hitting the sidewalk, he did come through. But as a result of his head hitting the sidewalk and the damage that was done, he did get into a place that night to lay his head down. And that is the place where he died. He did not
Oh,
recover. And so that is where my journey began. That was on August 19th, 2017. On
yeah.
August 21st, 2017, that is when I got a call from my daughter I was at lunch. It was the day of the solar eclipse. I will always remember that day because I like to
Of
say it was a
course.
total eclipse of my heart. And
Mm.
so even that day, it was at lunchtime. I was watching it, the eclipse, and I got a phone call on my cell phone from my daughter. And I thought that was odd because she knows I'm at work and she knows that I don't usually answer my cell phone while I'm at work.
Right.
But something was about this call. I just answered it, because, I'm just watching the eclipse and she was kind of panicky, asking me, when's the last time you talked to Curtis? And I'm thinking, well, it's not my birthday. It's not Christmas. So I don't know what's up.
Mm.
And she says, I'm kind of freaking out because I'm looking on his Facebook page and I'm seeing all these things, rest in peace. And I don't know what's going on. And I know she was driving. And I know my daughter is very emotional. And so I tried to calm her down. That was my first thing. Let me calm her down. So I'm thinking some of the buzzwords around then was, I'm like, you know what? It's probably just fake news because at the time that was the buzzword, fake news. And I had
Mm.
seen some things on Facebook where, they're saying certain celebrities had died and they really hadn't. So you go to Snopes and find out, that's not true, before you start spreading that stuff. That's not true. And so I'm thinking it could be one of those things. Nevertheless, let me just finish my lunch. And I'm telling her, well, just go home and be calm. I'm going to go check it out. It's everything's okay. Just chill out. I'll get back with you. And so I go up to my desk. I work at a law firm. I'm a legal assistant. I always have everything always together. I'm prim and proper, always professional, poker face. You would never know if I was ready to snap your head off because it would not show on my face because I'm always remaining in character because I have
Yes.
a reputation and I don't want to tarnish that because, I got angry. So I always try to subdue that part of me just to be pleasant and get along and be a good Christian. So anyway, I'm going back up to my desk and I'm going to, take a moment and look on Facebook and see just what's going on. And when I go on there, I could not believe my eyes, what I was seeing. And then my heart, the way my heart started palpitating, it's like it's agreeing that something's not right here. And so that's when my moment of panic really set in. And I'm saying, let me reason. She said that he called. My daughter told me that she called his phone and he didn't answer. I'm thinking if I call, surely he will answer when he sees mom. So
Of
I'm going to
course.
call. So no answer. Breathe in, breathe out. I'm trying to pace myself now because, it hadn't checked in with my head that this is really right yet. But the way my heart was reacting, I knew something was up. So I called the number again and someone answered, but it wasn't Curtis. And I was just
Mm.
like, it was his friend who still had his phone. And that was the friend where he crashed that night.
Oh.
Someone helped him get to his house because he lived close by and they knew him. So they, brought him there and said, he's had a little situation. Here he is. Let him crash here. And he's like, okay, come on in. Allegedly, that's what happened. I don't know. I wasn't there.
Right.
However, he answered the phone and I said, well, tell me what happened. And he says, he went from like a grown man who was in his 30s, late 30s or something, sounding like a kid. I'll tell you what happened. I'll tell you exactly what happened. And I'm thinking, okay, this is like a teenager or something. But anyway, and so he
Yeah.
went on to tell me the story, his version of what happened, which wasn't the version of what happened. But nevertheless, that's all I had to go on that, he got in some kind of altercation or he was drunk. Oh, he started off by saying, your son's an alcoholic, right? That's how he starts off.
Oh gosh.
And I'm thinking, I didn't know this, but keep talking because I'm trying to figure out what went on. And so he told his version of what went on. And the reason he may have thought that my son was an alcoholic and he came in drunk is because when his head was on the sidewalk after someone knocked him out, the people standing around allegedly poured their drinks on him to wake him up.
Oh
So, of
gosh.
course, that's how he smells. Um, and if I could fast forward to the toxicology report, clear, clear. That's not the
Mm.
problem. And I had to be the one to tell the coroner's office this. And I know I'm skipping way ahead to that moment when I got that phone call. But when I went to check and see all of this rest in power, I had the phone number for the deputy, the detective to call. That's when I headed to the conference room at the end of the hallway, just so that I could make this call in private. But I didn't make it all the way to the conference room before something erupted on the inside of me and came out as the most horrific wail that you can even imagine. I was on the 37th floor, and people came running from the 38th floor, from the 37th floor, and from the 36th floor because they heard this wail. And later I found out that one of the ladies remarked, "Someone's lost a child." I recognized that sound.
Oh, wow. But you had just experienced a parent's absolute worst nightmare.
Absolute. You cannot eat. No one, nothing can prepare you for that moment. Even, even if your child's been sick, the moment that it happens, it's like a release, but you kind of brace for the impact, in some ways, still holding on to hope that they will recover. But when it comes from out of the blue and the impact is pulverizing. I can't even think of a word to really describe the impact of what it did in that moment.
Yeah, I'm
But
not sure that there is a word in the English language
not one
that
word.
accurately captures that.
No, no, you have to paint pictures. It's not anything you really want to go back to over and over in your mind. But unfortunately, that's the reality of some people, depending on what situation they were when their child left here. It goes over and over and over in your mind. And the questions, what could I have done differently? And you deal with the guilt of it all, just so many emotions, and it's like all of the emotions that are bad pound on you all at one time and beat you up. And if
Yeah,
you don't have any fight in you at all, then you will lay there and take it and just die. But if you have God in you at all, he will fight that battle because he knows it's too much. He
yeah, that
knows
is
that you can't do that in your strength. That's why he's God, and he comes to pick you up like a loving father. It's like, I know this hurts, but I've got you. I
right.
know it hurts. Let me hold you closer. And depending on, how close you are to your father, you may be fighting him off and say, "Get away from me. I don't want you to touch me." No, but even
Yeah,
that, he hovers over you with love, and his love that hovers over you, even if you're having that little temper tantrum because of the pain. You don't know what to do. It's agonizing. You don't know how to respond. And then you have to deal with the people, that want to
yeah,
help you. You don't know what to do yourself. And now they're coming to help you their way. And it could make it worse.
yeah. If they
Really.
haven't lost a child themselves, then as much as they want to help,
Yes.
all too often, in their desire to help, sometimes they use words that aren't particularly helpful, and sometimes they offer advice that's not always helpful.
Yes.
Sometimes it could even be hurtful. And I
Yes.
think you would probably agree with this. Tell me if you would or wouldn't. Sometimes the very best thing that people can offer you in those moments, especially those early hours and days and weeks, is just the gift of their presence.
Oh, that is it. Just be present. You don't even have to say a word. I remember going at my son's funeral, some of the friends, because I had to go from Tampa to Virginia where we were from. And I would just see some of my friends, just to see their face in the crowd. That was a knowing. That was enough to know I was not alone. And that's one of the things you want to know. You're not alone, but you really don't want people to bum rush you, give
Right.
you space to be alone in this space where everyone is. Everyone's in this space. You're not the only one that's in this grieving space. But if it's your child, that is a space no one knows but you and God. No
Yeah.
one knows how you are in that moment because he knows you all together. He knows what makes you tick. He knows what's going to set you off. And what happened in my case, I guess maybe it was the armor of God that was protecting me in a lot of ways because I could see the attacks would come, like the attack on my health, the attack on your mind. Am I going crazy? You know how many people think I'm going crazy just because you can't function anymore? You think you're losing it, you're going crazy. No, that's grief. That is
Yeah.
an effect of grief. You don't have it all together, and it may take you a while to get it together. And I know I had to go back to my job and function on my job, even though I was functioning naturally as far as getting up and driving to work and dealing with people as best I could. But I didn't stay involved in a lot of activities, so I didn't have to deal with the magnitude of some people.
Right. Right. How long you after you lost him did you have to go back to work?
Oh, almost right away. I had grace for what I did, so maybe 2 weeks. I think I may
Oh
have
wow.
taken 2 weeks,
Yeah.
just to
Yeah.
get, and that was great because they will pay you so many days for bereavement, but that's not nearly enough to recover your senses. All of your senses were shaken. Everything
Oh,
about your world is shaken. And now you can't just expect me to come and sit in the workplace and just function business as usual. I may get through it, but you don't know what I'm going through on the inside just to do that. And then to go home after all that to the family, where you've been holding it in all day. And when you come home to the family, your place where you can relax and let it all go, where then they become victims of the grief splatter too. Because
yeah.
it has a ripple effect to every part of your life.
Yeah. It touches a
So,
lot of people in a lot of different ways. And
yes,
I'm glad that you shared what you did about going back to work just a couple of weeks after losing Curtis. Some employers are more generous with that time off. Some are not as generous. And if you're listening today and you are an employer or you work in a corporation where you have some influence over some of those benefits that your fellow employees have, I would encourage you to have a conversation around thinking about what Charmaine has just shared with us, that parents who lose a child are in such a state of shock and disbelief and are not functioning normally, mentally, emotionally, in some ways spiritual, some ways physically, because it does sometimes result in PTSD, PTSD-like symptoms. Consider that these parents need time away from that responsibility. And if you'll do that, when they come back, they'll be a better employee and able to do their job a lot more effectively.
I agree wholeheartedly. And I was fortunate enough to be employed by a firm who incorporated that sentiment. Our human resources director, Lisa Murfield, she was so gracious and she totally understood the impact of death in the family because she advocates for that in her corporate capacity and as a
Hmm.
human resources director. In fact, she goes around and she speaks at events, and she brings this to the table for them to help their employees along during these times because these are real life-changing events that really
Yeah.
affect not only job performance, but we really care about the whole person, not just as an employee, but as a person. And we want to extend
Yeah.
grace to them during this time. So I was
Yeah.
really fortunate to work for a firm like Hill Ward Henderson. And I do have to just say their name because, they served me well as I served them. And it does make for for better employees and employee relations and people who want to stay there as family. I have a work family. I'll call that my work family
Yeah.
because they were there for me at that time of my deepest need.
Yeah.
They were there. So I had so many families to reach
Yeah.
out, just surrounded me.
That's so important.
Yes, it was
Yeah.
most important. I had my
Yeah.
family. I have my Richmond family because I'm from Richmond,
Right.
Virginia. I have my Tampa family, which is my in-laws, which are really my in-laws right here because, it's all one family. My church family, every family that I had, even my business community, those that I know there. It was just a joint effort to help everyone come to wholeness and healing and support however they need to be supported. And I also wanted to be a part of that support system because I realized how important it was to me.
Sure. Charmaine, over the past 6 years, what would you say that you've learned about grief through your own journey that you didn't know prior to losing Curtis that you wish more people understood better?
I wish I didn't have this understanding before because I had experienced grief before. My mother died, my father died, my dearest aunt died. But
Right.
this was so different. And the one thing that I could really just say, people, please understand this. Everyone grieves differently. There's no right and wrong way to grieve. Allow people the space to grieve how they want to. And you may not recognize it as grief, but just consider this. They have lost a child. They have
Right.
lost a part of them. However it came about, some mothers never had an opportunity to hold a child in their arms, but they held that child within themselves, within their body. That was their child, and they lost that life. It's painful, and it's a pain that never goes away. You learn how to manage it. So while we're managing our pain, give us grace, and we will extend grace to you too. We extend the same grace to you when we want to snap your head
Mm.
off for asking a rude question or saying something that we deem is inappropriate. I'm extending grace to you because of my frailty right now. But I also want to extend that same grace to myself and give myself the grace to be okay with not being okay.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's like that.
Yeah. That is very well said, and it's so incredibly accurate. As you have been talking, it makes me think about our own grief journey. You know, grief changes everything. Let me be more specific. Grief that results from the death of a child changes everything, right? When you think back to those early days, Charmaine, tell us about something that was just an ordinary, routine activity that you really never gave a whole lot of thought to. It's just something that you did, just a part of your daily routine that suddenly seemed all but impossible to do. And I'm asking you this because this is another, when we say that grief changes everything, it even changes the little things. Is there anything like that that you could share with us that it changed with you?
Well, if you say go back to the very beginning, in the very beginning, the first day, the one thing that I started to do that I hadn't really done before was before I laid my head down to sleep, I would thank the Lord for a sweet sleep because that's what He
Mm.
promised me. And I didn't do that before. I would just lay my head down and I would go to sleep in 5 minutes. I never had a problem. But I knew that night I may have a problem with a sweet sleep. And I was exhausted, but I was almost afraid to lay my head down because I didn't know what was going to come in the night for me. And I just wanted to have a sweet sleep. And I remembered the scripture that said that God promised me that. And so I thanked Him before I went to sleep for a sweet sleep. I thanked him ahead of time for what I was going to receive. And when I woke up that morning and realized that he had granted me that, that became a new way of living for me, to acknowledge him in everything. We say that scripture, acknowledge the Lord in all your ways and he'll, direct your path. Well, that was the beginning of me acknowledging him in every little thing throughout the journey, because I knew he was already speaking to me just words of encouragement the whole way. So I tuned into him a little bit more. And that was really the real change that came in me, what was totally different from the way I used to do things. I was really tapped into listening to his voice.
Yeah.
That was a major change. And from that, everything else began to change, because he started to lead me through the valley of the shadow of death. And,
Yeah.
and I was more aware. I became more aware of everything, because when that peace that I experienced the first time, as days went on, I wanted to hold on to that peace, because if it was available to me then, it's got to be available to me now, because I feel life coming in on me and I want that peace that I had in that moment. And that's when the reality came to me that I had to, it's for you, but is it precious to you enough for you to fight for it? And so my mindset began to change. Like, anything that interrupts my peace, I'm going to deal with it. But I still had to deal with, the NYPD, who had not yet, arrested anybody for my son's death. So that's
Right.
something that is still ongoing 6 years later. Even though I have a joy unspeakable and full of glory, there's still something that needs to be done. But in spite of that, I'm still triumphant and I'm still walking in victory, which is a part of the testimony. But my habits changed to what I was listening to, and
Yeah.
I needed help. And so I was tapped into the help that was available, because I didn't think I could stand on my own. I was afraid to even try it. So I'm like, God, you brought me this far, so don't leave me now. I still need you. Even when I have
R-
those moments of breakdown, I'm see a skateboarder going down the street and I'm thinking about my son. How do I manage that emotion? I was
Right.
just walking through every single thing that a person that's walking through the journey of grief has to go through. I was experiencing those things, but my question was, okay, how do I deal with it? How do I maintain peace? How do I manage peace? And then I begin to write about it. So it's
Yeah. Let's talk about that.
like,
So, as we fast forward to over this 6 year journey, today in 2023, your life has changed pretty significantly. And you just mentioned that's one of the ways you became an author. I believe you told me at the age of 62.
62 or 63 for the first time, because I wanted to share Curtis's story. I wanted to talk about what was happening, because I was still waiting for the NYPD to do something. So I wanted to do something that they could, like, just keep his legacy alive, keep his name out there. And that was one of the things that came about, because I was asking God, how are you going to turn this around for good? That was my question. I know you said you would take what the enemy meant for evil and you'd turn it for good, but how are you going to turn this to good? There's nothing good about this situation.
Right,
How? And
right.
that was my question. How are you going to do it? How are you going to do it? Well, he didn't answer me how. He showed me. This is how
Hmm.
I'm going to do it. You're going to follow me. You're going to listen to me. I'm going to lead you out. I'm going to lead you out. You're going to open your heart and know that I'm good. And you're going to love me and tell everybody how good I am. That's how I'm going to turn it around for good. And so the good that he turned it around from that first book at 62, Who Killed My Son? A Mother's Wait for Justice. I
Hmm.
shared a little story about Curtis's story, who he was as a kid, how he kind of grew up, and some things about his life, and then the event that happened. And then from that point, I had just entered into the world of authorship with that book. So from that book, I had another prayer that was really on my heart that I wanted to encourage mothers with. So I wrote that prayer, and that's a part of an anthology in Soulful Prayers, published by Cheryl Pelote Williamson. I connected with her in 2 anthologies. And that was my first time becoming a best-selling author on Amazon, through Amazon. And then there was more of my story to share and tell. So I wrote another book, in an anthology, No More Residue. And I have my chapter in there, The Courage to Speak. At the time when I wrote that chapter, I didn't have the courage to speak. But
Mm,
now, as I am at the end of this grief process, the journey goes on, but this part of the
right.
grief process, I am a contributing editor for Cheryl Magazine. I am a freelance editor with my own company. I am doing everything that I ever dreamed that I wanted to do. And it's like the sky is the limit because I'm just getting started. My next book that I'm writing, in fact, that is really close to my heart, is because it's From Grief to Gratitude, a 31-day devotional to greater peace. And I wanted to share just with whoever the mothers are who are still hurting, not just for mothers who have lost children, but anyone who's still grieving or suffering any kind of loss and want to find peace. I wanted to, through my testimony, throughout that 31-day devotional, just share little nuggets of how I found that peace. And, I just have a little prayer at the end where they can just speak it themselves to God and bring peace and usher peace into their own lives just through what He walked me through. I just want to share the goodness of God through my experience and make an
Yeah.
impact. And if I impact just one person, and I already have, that's enough for me. I'm satisfied with that, but I'm driven to continue on because there's so many. I was one who needed help. I needed that
Yeah.
community. I found that community in Mending Hearts Ministry. I want everybody to find that community because it blessed me so much, because it allowed me to be vulnerable in my pain and not be judged in my pain, because everybody understood the pain of a parent, because now they are reaching out to fathers who have lost children. And I'm thinking that's so great because it impacts the whole family. There are siblings who are impacted, and
Absolutely.
if the children are young, sometimes you think they don't know what's going on. Let's not talk about it. And so you grow up in a household where nobody's talking about it, but the child sees the pictures and she hears the comments and she wants to know. So,
Right.
let's open up the conversation around grief and know, as my mom said, it's on death is an integral part of life, and how
Yeah.
you deal with it and manage it. God can help you with that, or you can find a way. But God was my way, and I'm glad that it was Him.
Absolutely. And, one of the things that you just said is so critical in our healing process is finding community, allowing other people into our lives so that we can talk with them about our child and share our story. And in the process, it allows us to process through that.
It
And one of the
helps.
keys to that is finding people who are good listeners, who aren't trying to fix us, because we're not projects. We're people who are grieving, who are dealing with an unimaginable pain, and we want to know that other people, while they may not understand, we just want to know that they care enough to listen, and that helps far more than most people can even begin to imagine. And it's so encouraging to hear what you just shared, Charmaine. It's the evidence of how God takes something so tragic and brings good from it. And through this podcast, I get to meet so many incredible people. It's one of the things I love about doing this. I get to I get to see that common thread, different stories for sure, different grief journeys for sure, but the common thread is seeing how God works through those journeys that are so different and brings meaning and purpose and hope and joy back into people's lives. And then how they respond to that with a desire to help other parents who are going through the same thing, and siblings, as you said as well.
Yes, it's important to know that you're not alone and that people want to help because we understand it's such a unique type of grief that we really understand. Whenever I hear that a mother's lost their child, I just want to reach out, and my mind goes to how can I reach out, even if they're across the nation and I see a news report. I'm like, what's their name? I want to reach out to them. I want to, just share hope and light with them, and I will have that opportunity. You have that opportunity with this podcast to share that hope and light that's there. So, my message to the whole world is that yes, hold on, hold on. Help is on the way. Hope is right there. Peace is available. Grab hold to whatever little bit that you can, and you will get stronger and stronger. Find that community. Find that
Absolutely.
community.
Yep. And I think Charmaine would absolutely agree with this. And we want to be very clear through not just this episode, but across the board in our podcast, that the hope and the joy and the peace and the meaning and purpose that we've been talking about is found in a relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ.
That was the bottom line for me. That's what helped me hold it together. I would have been in a
Absolutely.
billion pieces. Even then, he could speak to the dry bones, but we didn't have to go there because I had already established a relationship with him that he is good, he is faithful. But I was at a crossroads, like, you need to show me now. No, it's not a test. I'm not giving you a test, but
Right.
please, God, be who I thought you always were. And he proved to be faithful. And it was like, I knew you were good, God. I knew you were good. I just didn't know how you were going to do it, how you going to bring me up because I've never been that low before. So,
Mm, 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 mm.
you're good. And that's
I
my
can
testimony.
I can echo that, and that is an incredible testimony. I knew before we lost our son Ryan that God was good. I knew that,
Right.
but I didn't know how good he really is until we were on the other side of it.
Yes.
So I'm
So
very
keep
thankful.
going through. You have to go through. You have to go through, but you don't have to go through alone. And there
No,
are
you don't.
people like us who are there who say, yes, let me share my story. Let me hold your hand. Let me tell you some of the things I did to help me in certain situations. Grab what you can, but bit by bit, you're going to come back together to wholeness. That one little piece is going to be missing, but you're still going to be whole.
That's exactly right. Well, Charmaine, I think there are going to be a lot of people who are listening to our conversation today that are going to be blessed. They're going to be encouraged. They're going to find hope because of what you've shared that God has done in your life. And I think you would probably agree with this, that if you're listening today and you too are suffering the loss of a child, and at some point, if you want to share your story, we would be honored to host your story. Just get in touch with us through our email address that's listed in the description of every one of our episodes. But Charmaine, thank you so very, very much for blessing us and giving us the honor of hosting your story and allowing God to work through you by sharing your pain with other people and sharing the hope that He's brought to your life on the other side of that.
That's the main thing, sharing the hope. So thank you for the opportunity to bring that kind of hope through your platform. I really appreciate you. And this has been so helpful for me just to be a guest here.
I'm so glad, and it is indeed a privilege to do so.
Thank you.
If you find our podcast meaningful, we invite you to follow us so that you can automatically receive the latest episodes. Also, we'd like to invite you to contact us and talk with us about sharing your story on a future episode, because every story is important and matters to God. Please reach out via email at hope@emptychairendeavor.com. That's hope@emptychairendeavor.com. And as always, thank you so much for listening.